Hi, my name is Henning Pauli. I'm going to take you on a journey of the Blackmagic Design switches. Not just this one, but almost all of them. But we're going to focus on the little ones, the more affordable ones. Now, at the end of this series, you should know which one of these is right for you, for your knitting show, your private newscast, your channel where you talk about movies, your Lego channel, your maybe outdoorsy thing. Oh, how are you going to do that with this being inside? Your BMX live stream event, whatever. Hopefully, with the information I'm going to give you, you'll be able to discern where to spend your money. Preferably at Sweetwater, because they're sponsoring this video series and they have almost all of the Blackmagic Design stuff. Now, with currently 21 different ATEM switches on the market, for someone looking at, want to buy an ATEM, it's almost impossible to know what to buy. I'm saying 21 because there are some discontinued that, of course, in your search, you will still find. Like in the back there, that's a Television Studio Pro 4K something. It's almost impossible to even remember all the names, but that is still being sold because there's some still in warehouses. Even the previous line of switches, the 1ME, 2ME, broadcast, 4ME, production studio, 4K capable, they're still being sold, even at Sweetwater. And they're about 10 years old, so we're going to go into those as well. And this is what the mini line started with, the ATEM Mini HDMI. That's not even something they do anymore. If we look at the current line, there's 6 of them, but there technically are 8 of these. So this one, they don't make anymore, and the Extreme HDMI, they don't make anymore. But because you can find them, I have them in my list, and we're going to talk about them. So we're gonna go from small, discontinued, but you would probably still find these used. It's not gonna make Sweetwater happy, but I'm here to make you happy. To ridiculous. We're currently in almost ridiculous here. Not super ridiculous. I don't have a Constellation 8 or Constellation 4 for 10 grand. I wish I had it, but still pretty ridiculous setup. So this is what it started with in 2019. And we should have cameras showing you this. This is the ATEM Mini HDMI switcher, 4 inputs, 1 output, that in software you can determine what you see there. So you can say whether that's program out, which is technically what is going to be recorded, or multi-view, which is going to be all the different cameras. This gives you a webcam out. So you could really just use this for an improved video conferencing. With 2 cameras, you can switch back and forth. That works. Or 2 cameras and an iPad, or your phone, or a laptop. You could use this for broadcasting a presentation, just with you picture in picture. And just feed it to Skype, feed it to Zoom. This is just a webcam out in HD, okay? This can be software controlled, and that can be handled either through USB, the control, or network. They all have network, so if the USB out is blocked, you can use network to remote control these. And there are 2 mic inputs, which can be switched to mic line or mic in power or whatever. This does not have a section here. This section on the others will be live stream, record onto a connected hard drive, and switching what you see on the HDMI out. This can't do it. It's convenient, and maybe that's why they discontinued it, even though the SDI version of this still is the same, just with SDI. We're gonna get to this. Let's talk about 1 or 2 boohoo things. Blackmagic Design almost never couple of exceptions, almost never have on and off switches. It's the stupidest thing that I've ever seen. Why save on and on and on and on and on and on and why save on and off switch? But yeah, look at this. Yeah, we got an overhead cam, which is a micro 4K. We're going to get to that in the next video. You plug it in, it can even screw in, but if you want to turn it off, you have to unplug it. Why isn't there a little clicky? Come on, Blackmagic Design. Dumb. Okay, and you can see mic 1 and 2. That's where you put your audio in. It's not the best connection. However, you can access the audio coming in with HDMI. So if you have a camera, for example, that has an XLR input, you could use that. So that's okay. But where's the headphone out? Do you see headphone out anywhere? No. All the minis don't have headphone out. So what you have to do is where this goes, where that signal goes with HDMI to a computer monitor, a TV, whatever, you have to plug your headphone or your speakers into that so you actually hear what you're doing. It's an omission that really hurts me. They did remedy that on the extreme versions. But then again, you're starting with like, $1,000 or like $1,300. I wish they had a headphone out. But these can actually already do green screen, transitions, picture in picture. They have still images that you can put on the screen. They have format conversions. So any kind of HD or below automatically gets converted to the frame rate and resolution that you set up in here. I usually go for, in HD, 1080, 25 frames. In America, you might go 24 or 23 point blah, 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 or 29 point blah, blah, blah. Anything gets automatically converted, which is amazing because my really big switcher in Studio A costs $7,000, can't even do that. If I have the wrong frame rate and the wrong resolution, I just get a black picture. So the previous generation had to have the camera set up perfectly to whatever the switcher was set up to. With these little ones, or even the new generation of 4K, anything that you feed them is fine. That is convenient because it just works. Okay? So this used to be $300, but no longer. It's discontinued. The next one in the line now is the first one in the line, which is the ATEM Mini Pro. And you can already see that they added this section right there, which adds the ability to pick what you see on the HDMI out, multi-view program, any of the cameras you can make big on the screen. And then there's streaming and recording right here. So if you're of course recording with the USB out right there, that means you have to do remote control or software control through the Ethernet. Other than that, still no headphone out, everything else the same. And that is now the lowest one in the range at $295 at Sweetwater. It's amazing. Have I mentioned, $295 for a HD format converting, green screen capable, picture-in-picture capable, 4-input switcher. Ridiculous. The prices, by the way, $295 in Germany, $319, or Europe, 319 euros. So the prices actually are always ballpark the same. Sometimes prices deviate quite a bit because here in Europe we've got 19% tax. The Sweetwater price would not include tax, but somehow we're in the ballpark, $20 more in Europe. Now, what would you use the one for that doesn't have this stuff and that actually can't do internal recording or recording to a hard drive, like something like this? Hook it up there, record forever. That's 500 gig and an HD. That's going to get you a few hours. What would you use that for, like the Mini or the SDI Mini? Well, improved video calls. You don't have to necessarily record, but with a webcam out, live streaming, not directly from it, you can do that here, but with the other one, you could go take it into OBS and stream from there. You could go and do Twitchy stuff. You could go and do, I don't know, TikToky? I have no idea. But you definitely, for video conferencing and maybe installing it in a conference room in a bigger company and just being able to have different cameras on different people, you wouldn't need the recording or the live streaming, but the webcam out is still going to get you a very usable box. Now this, of course, has a live streaming, and that means it eliminates Wirecast or OBS. You can actually put your YouTube streaming key right there in the software, and from then on, once you taught it that, every time you push the little stream button, it goes live on your channel. So be careful with that button. And also, they now have a long, long list of StreamYard and other platforms that you can stream to right from this without ever actually opening their software. That's pretty crazy. The next one in the series is this, but in ISO. Doesn't look any different other than that it says ISO. Clocks in at 495 or in Europe 529. And it adds an ISO workflow. And that is kind of brilliant, even though it's just in HD. Now with the ISO version of it, on the connected hard drive, it records all the inputs individually. Also, all audio tracks, not just the ones plugged in here, but all the audio coming in from the cameras, all gets recorded into an audio folder. Individual files. Individual ISO video files, in addition to the program that you switched. So whatever you're switching is being recorded as the final video, but you have the source files in audio and video. And you also have a DaVinci Resolve file. DaVinci Resolve is Blackmagic Design's in-house video editing software, which is actually pretty powerful. And I installed it. I usually work in Final Cut, did a little test, opened the file, and there was my whole video. It's not just the actual finished video. No, it records every single button press, every transition you do, every picture in picture, and then again references the original files on the individual inputs because it has those, which means you can change everything. You can change the transition length. You can change what camera it was transitioning to. You can change the length of cuts. You can change what was in the picture in picture. Everything is editable after the fact. That is pretty damn brilliant and means you can never make a mistake switching around because you can always fix it later. Difference is $200. If you ask me, it's worth it. Absolutely. And there's actually a really cool thing if you're working with Blackmagic Design cameras where you can later scale to 4K using that workflow. It's a little bit of an extra step, but bang for the buck, probably the cheapest 4K live editing workflow that you will find. So the way it works is you record an ISO file on the ISO version, either the SDI or Extreme ISO or one of the ISO switches. Have your DaVinci Resolve file, but in the software, you instruct the software to put all your Blackmagic Design cameras, who are hopefully equipped with an external hard drive, that's what they would have to be connected to also record at the same time. And frame accurately, it will hit record on the cameras remotely. That means when you're done, you collect your hard drives from the individual cameras, upload those Blackmagic RAW, sadly it's just B-RAW. We call it B-RAW. Blackmagic RAW files, that means you can actually change all the color, ISO, gain, all these things later on, which is very convenient for color grading. So you collect those files, put them in a folder on your computer. You open the ISO file of your edit that you did, tell DaVinci Resolve, exchange my HD files with the files from the cameras in 4K. And Bob's your uncle, there's your whole edit, and all of a sudden you've got it in 4K. So even with the invest of $500 in the ISO switcher, as long as you're using Blackmagic Design cameras and you're recording on the cameras individually, you don't even have to run around, the software just triggers them and they're all recording, you can have a 4K file later on. However, it requires that extra step of the hard drives, collecting them, putting the files on the computer, and doing that in DaVinci Resolve. So it's an extra step, an extra export. It'll take X amount of time, but it is a 4K workflow with an HD switcher. If you work only with Blackmagic Design cameras. Okay, there's a caveat, that's how you say that. But it is brilliant. Moving on to the ATEM Mini Extreme, now discontinued. So this one that I got here is from my friend Sebastian, who I also counseled on what he needs. He has a great channel, super nerdy for internet stuff and routers and network protocols, absolutely super nerdy stuff. And he's done a lot of lessons in German. He's very popular in Germany for teaching people that kind of stuff. And he's done it all with this. He put his Surface for Microsoft in here, doing picture-in-picture stuff, and it can write on the Surface. Really, really good videos. He doesn't need the 8 inputs, but he definitely can benefit from the extra features that the Extreme has. Now again, this is the ATEM Mini Extreme. I think they're now just called Extreme, maybe. But in HD, the only one you can now get is the ATEM Extreme ISO. So they got rid of the ATEM Mini Extreme. This is not an ISO version. You might still run into this somewhere in shops that still have them, but just know that there's a difference. There's the ATEM Mini Extreme and the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. This one, discontinued, you can find for $1,000 or €1,029. Now, if we look at it, it definitely adds a few things just in terms of connectivity that really I would recommend. For example, a headphone out. You have no idea how important that is. 8 inputs, but very nice 2 outputs. So output number 1, you can switch on the front panel again. Output number 2, you can define in the software what you've got on there. I always have multi-view and program. You now have 2 USB-C ports. You could put 2 different hard drives on there and then just switch between which one you record to. You could have 1 hard drive and a computer connected, which eliminates you having to use Ethernet. You could have 2 hard drives and the computer. Different options. It just is very convenient. Still no on and off switch. So on the front panel, we have, of course, the 8 buttons. But one thing that it does, and you're going to see this in the setup videos, is it does super source. In super source, you can actually layer 4, with the background, even 5 videos on top of each other and do 5 picture-in-pictures in a configuration that you want. And instead of always reassembling that, all you do is hit super source and then 4 times picture-in-picture or 3 or 2 in different configurations on the screen shows up. Super convenient. Here you also have more picture-in-picture options, including these 2 next to each other, which will give you input 1 and 2, which is very cool. You got a couple more transitions. Of course, all 8 inputs, a clean feed, a preview button, which the other ones don't have, multi-view and program to be assigned to HDMI out. And like the others, on-off for mic 1 and 2, but headphone controls and camera control. So if you're working with Blackmagic Design cameras, from this panel, you can control the cameras. We tried it. It's a bit cumbersome. Focus requires you to push this or just hold it forever. This through the software, it is quicker and more convenient, but you could remote control Blackmagic Design cameras, at least for gain, focus, black, and shutter. So you pick it and then up and down. Then there's also a whole bunch of buttons up here that I don't really quite know exactly what they're for because I haven't really worked with this. But more buttons equals better. If you can, not because you need the 8 inputs, but because of the extra functionality, extra outputs, extra USB and headphone out, I would recommend getting an Extreme. However, I understand more desktop space, more money. I don't want to sell you anything you don't need, but if you're saying, well, I don't really care that it's a couple of $100 more, this will open options. More options, more better. Now again, this is discontinued. Let's talk about the ISO version, which is not discontinued, called the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. At Sweetwater, clocking in at $12.95, and in Europe, $13.39. So €40 difference, €40 difference. Exactly the same thing, but it adds ISO recording on all 8 inputs. So you're going to end up with, if you actually have 8 cameras and laptop and whatever, 8 individual video files and the program file, all the individual audio files and a DaVinci Resolve file to do the ISO workflow. And if you so choose, go 4K later. Now, how that would work with, for example, putting in a computer, which of course would be recorded in HD, that you wouldn't have in 4K. So it would only apply to Blackmagic cameras. Now we move on to SDI. Before we move on to SDI, let's talk about SDI. HDMI cables are not a great connection. Even worse if you have micro HDMI. That's that really tiny one. You don't want to wiggle that. It's gonna probably break off the cable. I have wrecked more micro HDMI cables than anything else, which is why at any given point in time, I own like 20. I just throw it away, go to the next one. And then there's mini HDMI, it's a little bit better, some Canons have that. And then there's big HDMI, which something like the FX3 has, for example, or the Blackmagic Design BMPCC, Blackmagic Pocket Cinema. So the big full-size HDMI is, of course, a more stable connection, but it's still not a very professional stable connection. That can unplug, or it can actually break off. Now, a more professional connection is this. That is a BNC connection. It actually really screws in and then is securely tightened. You can see relatively thin cables. Cables of a lot of length. Yes, a lot of length. Because HDMI in 4K, you'd be hard-pressed to get a cable that can get you 8 meters. 5, yes. 7 to 10, difficult. You have to spend quite a bit of money. And then the cable is going to be a brick. It's going to be thick and unwieldy. And when you plug that into your HDMI port, you're actually scared to break off the camera or the cable. HDMI is okay for around your desk. It's okay to maybe run a little bit into the room, but then actually run into the room and up a tripod. If you want a stable, dependable, and secure connection, then SDI is the trick. I've got 3 of these big-ass rolls, drums. Why? Well, I think this is 100. I've got 75 and I think another 100. Well, because in HD, these are 3G cables. 3G actually stands for the amount of data. So 3G SDI, you probably read that on switchers and cameras. 3G means HD capable, not 4K. 6G means 4K capable up to 30 frames a second, up to 30p. So 4K 30p. And 12G, it's a lot more processing power, it's twice the amount of data. 12G is 4K 60p. So if you really need the high frame rate, you need 12G, but then you need your 12G everything. Everything in the system needs to be 12G. I personally always go for 25 frames, which means 6G is enough for me. These are not really 4K capable, but for Gear Street, my YouTube event, I actually used to run these video studios here, but I wanted people to see across the street, right over there, in the backyard, what we were doing. And so we were literally running this across the street, hanging between houses, running through a whole house, going to my mom's living room, going to a TV, splitting it up, running it across the garden into the garage. This is what you would use for broadcast type stuff. So you can run very long cables with SDI, not with HDMI. It's a better connection. It is more longer cables. So there's definitely benefits to SDI. Let's talk about issues with SDI before we talk about the SDI switches. Most cameras are not SDI capable. You probably look at your cameras and say, where do I plug this in? Probably nowhere. So you're going to need converters. So if you have a standard camera, you have a GoPro, you have a Pocket Cinema. This has an HDMI output right here. Nice. And I can run, 5 meter, maybe 10 meter cable, but then I'm done. Depending on where you're filming, let's say you're filming a an outdoor basketball game and you need one of these in each corner of the court. Not gonna happen. So you're gonna need to run a cable like this. How are you gonna plug it in here? You're gonna get a converter like this. Maybe even one of the older ones, a converter like this. So this is HDMI to SDI. So you plug your camera right in there, and on this side, it converts it to SDI. Plug your SDI cable in, and then run it to your switcher. Now, if you have one of those HDMI switchers, you're gonna need the opposite again. You need SDI to HDMI to go back into your switcher, which is HDMI connection. You could avoid that by going with one of the new ones, which have SDI right on the switcher. So if you have a camera like this, and you wanna run SDI, it is possible. Just get one of these boxes and then go into an SDI capable switcher. It eliminates the other box. However, I always recommend these boxes, which are bidirectional. So it's actually SDI or HDMI in, SDI out, and SDI out, HDMI in. So it actually goes both directions. And with this, you can actually still remote control this camera from the switcher, even though the switcher might have SDI. So the switcher is going to be connected into both of them, and that comes out here. And as I said to you, spend a bit more money. They come in bidirectional SDI, HDMI, and if you look at this, this is the 12G version, which means this is 4K capable. It is $100 more. But if you buy this now, later on when you go to 4K, for your whole system, you already have the right box. Do not, trust me, do not save the money here. Buy these boxes in the 4K versions. Sweetwater's gonna thank you because it's more expensive. But you're gonna thank me because later on you're gonna say, I've got the cameras, I've got the box. All I need now is the switcher. Other than that, you're never gonna make the jump because you have to buy all of these again. So this is why SDI is the way. Now, most of the cameras you have, I said, are probably, look, I mean, this is, you can't do this with an HDMI cable. Most of the cameras you have, whether it's a GoPro or whatever, they are not going to be SDI capable. I personally now really look for cameras that have SDI connections right on them, which is of course the Blackmagic Design cameras other than the Pocket. Most of what you see back there, this Sony FX6, 705 from Canon, 605 from Canon, there's a Komodo over there from Red. They all have SDI on them. And I make sure that the SDI outputs on those cameras are at least 6G, at least 4K capable. Because a lot of high-end cameras, you can spend $8,000 on a camera and then you really look into the specs. Trust me, please look into the specs. Make sure that your camera is future-proof for you in terms of 4K. You look into the specs and those SDI outputs on the cameras, they're usually for an external screen. They have a bigger monitor on the camera, which means they're only HD. So it looks like, oh man, it's got an SDI output, that's great, but it is usually only HD. Make sure when you look in the specs, if the SDI output can handle 4K, meaning 6G or 12, or if it's just for an external monitor in HD. I make sure that all the cameras with the SDI outputs I have are 4K capable, which again, later on will allow you to upgrade. And of course, if you have a camera with an SDI out that can do HD, you're still compatible with the ATEM Mini SDI. So that is the thing about SDI. I'm sorry for this long thing, but it's better cables, it's much longer cable runs, a more dependable system. And you can still work with your existing cameras, but you're gonna have to buy these boxes. Also, you see, this is an SDI version. There's no HDMI in the back, none. So what are you going to do? Well, there's two outputs, like on the Extremes, which is great. Just like on the Extremes, output number 1 can be switched right here, output number 2 in the software. But how are you going to hook up a monitor to this? Now, there are monitors like this Atomos, like the Video Assist from Blackmagic Design. There's another Atomos there. I've got an Atomos Sumo. They're all capable of accepting SDI, but that's more professional stuff. What if you have your old HD computer monitor and you want to use that? Well, either you're shit out of luck, or again, you're buying one of these boxes. If you've got this, you can actually put a camera into this and from the switcher to a monitor. So this will be dual purpose at the same time. Yes, not either or, at the same time. It's very important to know. It's a little bit annoying that it doesn't have HDMI right on it, but again, for a professional workflow, I could run this into a monitor 100 meters, that's 300 feet away. Can't do that with HDMI, can you? You can do that with the ATEM streaming bridge, which we're going to get into. We're not done by a long shot. This is pretty much what the ATEM Mini SDI looks like. This is the front panel. I don't have one here, but that's the front panel, just like the original ATEM Mini. It does not stream. It does not do internal recording to a connected drive. It is really just a great solution because of the SDI for conference rooms. Long cable runs through the walls in SDI. It's a good solution for that, not necessarily for streaming or recording. You would need an external recording device, like one of those Atomos or Blackmagic video assists, but you would need extra gear to do what the next bigger one already does. So it's okay to use that if you're doing, again, conferencing and stuff like this. And that makes a lot of sense because you will probably need longer cable runs than 5 meters. 5 meters is 15 feet, by the way. So the next one in this series then is this puppy, and I'm so happy Sweetwater sent that. Thank you, Sweetwater. This is the ATEM SDI Pro, oh my God, what's it called? ATEM SDI Pro ISO. There is a setup video where we do a whole setup with this later in the series. So you can see it is pretty much like the ATEM Mini Pro ISO. All the same thing with live streaming, with USB recording, all that stuff, but in SDI. And it has 2 outputs versus 1 HDMI because they just had more space in the back. And again, no headphone out. Boo. This one, highly recommended, but you're gonna have to invest more in the ecosystem because you'll probably, to run your cameras with it, have to buy some of these converters, which does push the budget up. Next one and last one in the series is the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. So it's the extreme version, big one, but all in, it's ATEM SDI Extreme ISO. That's what it's called. It's the 8 in ISO, all the same functions, but with SDI connections. So again, if you're running a church, I mean, the cameras are going to be right in front of the, whatever you call the thing in the church where people talk. People are going to be way in the back switching. You're going to have very long cable runs. You're not going to do that with HDMI. You could, of course, go cameras into a converter, SDI, run it at the back, SDI to HDMI. Yes, you can. Why not just get the SDI version right away? So the Extreme ISO SDI, the big one, is $14.95 in the States and $15.96, so about $100 more in Europe. Something really, really cool that they added a bit later is that you can connect the USB to your phone, and then in your phone, do hotspot, and if your phone's got 4G, 5G, you can actually use your phone on location as your streaming device for internet. And then you can still stream, but use the internet of your phone. That's pretty damn dandy. However, of course, if you do that, your USB port is blocked and you can no longer record to a hard drive, which is, if you're using one of the extremes, you have 2 USB ports and Bob's your uncle, Fred's your cousin. Now let's talk about camera control. Camera control is actually way cool. I'm going to show you this right here and we're going to mess it up. Leslie, change the focus on the main camera, please. Yep. And if I were to move around, she could react remotely. No autofocus necessary. They do have very, 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 very basic autofocus, but you don't want to use that. Why use it if you have this external control? She can change shutter, gain, everything, pedestal, actually full color correction if she wanted to, using color wheels and all that stuff. Now, with these, that would happen from the software, And with the extremes, you can do basic stuff on the actual panel. With higher ones, like now the brand new 4K8, brilliantly actually with a nice color screen right there on the panel, and you can do it, and you don't really have to go to the software. It's not quite there yet. There's one or two bugs with one of the older cameras, but it's really cool, and the workflow is much faster than always reaching up to a mouse and going into the software. Now let's talk about how that is done. That remote control. It's actually rather simple. When you're using HDMI, all you do is you connect your HDMI Blackmagic Design camera, which is actually all of them. All of them have an HDMI input or output, and that is bidirectional, meaning you plug this camera in or any of the studio cams, micros, whatever, up to the 6K versions, doesn't matter. Tell it to output 1080 for HD. And all the remote control is coming through the HDMI. All you gotta do is, if I'm plugging this into input number 3, I gotta go in here and tell this camera, you're now number 3. That's it. So each of the cameras have an assigned number, which you put in the camera, and it has to be plugged into that spot on your HDMI switcher. That's it. And all of a sudden you got remote control with Blackmagic Design cameras, which means you don't need camera people necessarily behind the cameras, and you can have someone in the next room beautifully setting everything up. Well, in the next room with HDMI, difficult. Cable run-wise, difficult. So they would have to be in the same room with you. But that means they might make noise. That could be an issue if they're chewing, drinking, clicking on the buttons, dropping things, which is why an SDI workflow makes more sense, right? Yes, but the problem is with the SDI workflow, SDI is unidirectional, which means, is that how you say that? I guess so. It doesn't get the video in and at the same time through the same cable send the remote control information out. So what you have to do, you have to get the output from a camera in here, let's say input 1, and then one of these SDI outputs carries the program out, whatever you're switching. And on that same output, hidden in the video signal, is actually the remote control, the remote control signal for all cameras. Which means if I'm telling that camera you're number 1, and I'm taking this back to that same camera, the camera has an output and an input, then the camera gets the remote control signal. With this, I have one going to a screen for multi-view, or whatever I set up, and then one going directly to the camera, which means I can do one Blackmagic Design camera and remote control it. I will need a distributor. So they make these in HD, and I think they're $170. And that gives you that, I take this program out into the distributor, and it simply duplicates it 8 times. And then I could actually go to 8 cameras, or another screen, whatever signal you feed it, it duplicates it 8 times. I recommend to go for the 4K version, which is 315, I think. I got it written down somewhere. It is the better idea, because then later, if you need a distributor, you go into 4K, guess what? You already have the 4K distributor. So I recommend getting that. But again, it depends on your budget. So if you want to remote control more than one Blackmagic Design camera with SDI, you will need a distributor. I think I own 4 of these. It is a great tool if you need to multiply a signal. So with SDI, you got to go in and out. With HDMI, just one cable. And that means, can you remote control this with an SDI switcher? And I just learned, yes, you can. You use this. You use the bidirectional. So this plugs in HDMI and then in and out from this to the switcher. So it is still capable of being incorporated into the SDI workflows. And then the cameras also give you tally lights. And that can be very convenient, because I see on top of my camera right now, it's got a big red 1 on it. And then if Leslie were to go to a camera with a preview, meaning I know that's the next camera she's going to switch to, that light would turn green, and I know, for example, to turn my head to the green camera because at some point she's going to switch to it. She just switched to it without going to preview and just confused me. So yes, she likes doing that. But you can see, I know which camera is on because I know that the light is off, and I know which light is on. Of course, behind the cameras, I have a monitor where I see what's happening. But the light really helps. Now on these, the tally light is up here. It's a lot smaller than on the studio cams. On the micro cams, they have that. So all of them have a tally light that can do different colors. And as a visual feedback of what's happening, it makes a lot of sense. So that is also carried with the remote control signal. Now, if you want to do picture-in-picture stuff, the software is a bit of a pain in the ass to resize and move things around and put a picture-in-picture at a certain size here. It works, but it's not intuitive. Now, once you go to the higher end switcher or you're getting an advanced panel, which is just a big remote control, you have a big joystick on it. And all you do is, with a joystick for picture-in-picture stuff, bam, bam, you just move it around, and by twisting it, you're actually shrinking it. It's a much more intuitive and very quick way to do more advanced picture-in-picture and super source things, also resizing it, masking it, cropping it much faster on that panel. That is not something you can do with the small ones. So if you're looking into overlays, picture-in-picture stuff, super source things, you might want to think about spending quite a bit more money on the bigger ones. If you're doing this many times, having the hands-on on the panel or the higher-end switches is much faster than doing it in software. However, you can, of course, do everything in software. Now let's talk about the bigger ones. Really beautiful panels, but not inexpensive. I mean, for what they can do compared to the competition, a joke, okay? The competition, I would say, with these features, sometimes up to 10 times the price of Blackmagic Design. So sometimes I might bitch about Blackmagic Design and their decisions and certain things that they're doing, but in terms of bang for the buck, there is nothing on the market that can beat them. And I think they know that. I think they know that. Sometimes they know it too much and take advantage of that. So the Television Studio HD8 clocks in at $29.95, or in Europe at $30.79, and that is kind of like the Extreme, but a much better panel. It sadly doesn't have the joystick, but it's got control on it. It's got much improved audio workflow. I mean, the audio stuff you can do now with gating, EQing, compression. It's got such an improved back panel with 4 Ethernet inputs, MADI input, which is a digital audio input, and you can actually get more audio tracks into it. It's got XLR input, 1/4 inch output, many more outputs in terms of SDI ins and outs. For each input, you actually have an aux input on top, so you could run each camera to something else. You could actually have, I think, 10 aux outputs, assigning whatever you want to each one of them. There's a lot more you can do with this versus the standard Extreme. It's also full color screens on each knob. The knobs come in different colors. So if you want just more control and a much more advanced workflow, that's where you would have to go. But you're gonna spend, well, $3,000 versus, let's say, the Mini Extreme non-ISO. It's $2,000 more. It's 3 times the price, but you do get quite a bit more. Not in quality necessarily, because it's still 8 inputs and HD. Now, if you go to the ISO version of that, which is called the HD8 ISO, that's another $1,000. So it's $3,995 in the States and $41.99 in Europe. That adds ISO workflow to the same thing we just talked about. It's a more advanced switcher with killer audio and ins and outs, but it also does the ISO. And I think they have internal hard drives. I'm not sure about those, but definitely about the 4K. So let's get to the 4K. The Television Studio 4K8 is what we're using right now next door. It just arrived 2 weeks ago, and I absolutely love it. The audio capabilities are amazing. We're actually recording on the XLR inputs and 4 channels on the MADI inputs separately onto the video file, which for which, by the way, you have to have an external recorder. Can't do it on the internal recording. That's actually cool. It has an internal NVMe hard drive, 2 terabyte. And I can just, without anything, just record, bam, right there internally. Done. Grab it through the network. Done. It's got 2 USB outs. It's got a reference in so much more that you can do with it. The 4K8, because it is 4K, does not have ISO. They don't even offer that. It's not possible. Because you couldn't, in terms of hard drive speeds, record a program and 8 4K inputs on a hard drive. They might have been able to do it with 2, but even then, H.264 could work, but it's difficult. So no ISO workflow. I wish what it did is give me the option to record on the external cameras, because they're all Blackmagic Design, and still record the DaVinci Resolve file for me. So maybe not internal files, but just record the session. Just record the session for me, and then I can go and replace the video files in the empty session. That would have been cool, and it should have been possible, and technically it should be possible to actually do that with an update, Blackmagic Design. Because it would be nice to have all the clickies and everything that Leslie is doing and be able to change that later if I myself provide the video files in Resolve. So Blackmagic Design, that would be a cool idea. I have to say though, I have, even of the older generation, higher switchers, but what they did in the 4K8 is phenomenal. It is a very, very good board. And now, with full camera control right there on the board, you don't even have to reach for the software anymore, except for one of the cameras that's not compatible. Yet, they're working on it. Bug. But that is $45.95, I think. Yes, $45.95 and $47.99 in Europe. It is $5,000, let's call it that. That's a lot of money. You're not going to jump into the system with that. But if you grow from the small one with a camera, a second camera, a third camera, and at some point you're going to say, look, this is my job now. I'm making money with it. Let's buy the switcher. My friend Carlos Asensio in Spain just now updated his whole studio, and he's using the 4K8 as well, and he's learning it, and he's having the best time. Now, what you could do with the 4K8, because it has all these aux outputs, you could use several hyperdecks or video assists or Atomoses or any other recorder and actually hook them up and record onto those recorders, and then you have the files. But you don't necessarily need to, because the cameras can be set to record along with them. Just don't know why it's not recording an ISO file. Why not? Why not? I forgot to say they also add, of course, dual analog audio out, RCA in, what else? A talkback section. You can actually plug in a mic, and there's a whole talkback section on the actual panel to talk to your camera people. So if you have the compatible cameras, which would be the studio cameras, you could actually say, I want to talk to this camera guy. They've got a headset on, and then you speak into a mic that you got connected to the panel, and you can say, could you please, focus more? Could you please go back a step? Could you please just you're going to be in the next shot, and now you're on. Hey, zoom out a bit. You can communicate with your camera people, which is, of course, an absolutely professional workflow. This is discontinued, sadly. There was an HD version called the Television Studio HD, I think, and this I got 2 years ago for Gear Street, for one of the studios that we always set up and tore down again. That is the Television Studio 4K. Now, it did clock in at 3,500, and that's what I paid. And now with all the new switches and the 4K8, this has been discontinued, sadly, because it's a great panel. Now, what it cannot do is live stream. What it cannot do is record by itself. You need an external recorder. But bang for the buck. Well, nowadays, you could get a 4K8 and have internal recording, live streaming, all that stuff. But because the new line came out, many stores still have these, and they reduced the price. So they're selling these off for around $2,000. So if you are ready to get into the 4K workflow and you're ready to record on an external recorder because you have an Atomos or a Hyperdeck or whatever, you could actually get into a 4K workflow with this for $2,000, as long as you can get them. And this will hold you over till you have enough money to buy 4K 8, or maybe never. You have camera control up here. Gain, focus, shutter, all that stuff, and do it right here. I never knew what this was for. You pick your camera right there. You also have very basic audio, loads of transitions. Camera name, so it doesn't have screens like the new ones, which is much, much, much nicer. So it's always a camera 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to remember what they are. But it is a great, great switcher. XLR input. Look, headphone out. Talkback input right there. Multi-view is HDMI. It's got an old school USB-B. And 12 volt as well as IEC. This is absolutely recommended. I'm sorry, Sweetwater, who are paying for this video. This is absolutely recommended if you can find it on the used market. Great board. They're gonna be gone soon. And then it's only the HD8, HD8 ISO and the 4K8 when it comes to fully integrated into the board. Now, they also released their line of Constellation switches in 3 different HD versions and a 4K version. And there's an 8K version, which I think is just for big screens, like, you know, in Times Square and stuff like that. I don't really necessarily know who can use that and what for. But the Constellation 8K is also 4K capable. But you can also just buy the Constellation 4K and you're done. So the cheapest one is about $1,000, and it is the HD. It's called the 1ME Constellation HD. It's got 10 inputs, which is actually 2 more than any of the others. In Europe, it's 1029. The benefit is, I mean, it's half rack mount kind of a thing. You can switch right there on the panel. It's not very convenient, but you could, of course, use an iPad, a Stream Deck, an Air Step from Exonic, or an advanced panel, if you buy the actual separate advanced panel, to remote control that. Which, if you ask me, makes no sense, because an advanced panel is $3,000, that thing is $1,000. You're getting very close to just buying a 4K8, okay? But the 2ME has 20 inputs. Now you're gonna say, what the crap would I need 20 inputs for? Now I have a broadcast studio for 4ME, I think it's called, and that has 20 inputs. And trust me, I've maxed that out. When you want to have many things connected, but not always in use, but just be able to go click, click, now it's in use. Or you have an actual broadcast, a sports broadcast where you have people outside doing interviews, but then also many, many different angles on your location with SDI long cables running to it. 20 inputs can go fast, trust me. I actually had my whole living room wired up, my whole studio wired up, all going into the thing through a video hub, recording drum programming courses. And I had 6 cameras on the drummer, several cameras on me. You'll use it. And then computer inputs, it happens. That is €16.95 or €17.79. Now the 4ME Constellation HD, you're looking at €36.95 or €37.49. And that's got 40 ins, which is crazy, but it's actually 40 inputs. I think it's 20 outputs, and all the outputs are fully configurable. They can be anything. Any of those outputs can be anything that you want. Individual camera, multi-view, program, whatever. They do not have, I think they also have the MADI input, but they do not have XLR input. They have only 1/4 inch. At some point, the ins and outs on the backs are limited. They also don't have the 4 Ethernet ports. Whether you want the panel with integrated ins and outs, which I think has a little bit more in terms of peripherals that you can connect, or the rack-mounted versions, is up to you. With the rack-mounted versions, it is always the thing that makes more sense is buying an advanced panel and having a tactile interface. Because why spend $4,000 on a Constellation HD 4ME in the rack and then work with a Stream Deck? Now, why would you want that in the rack? For mobile workflows. you're going to have that in a rack, maybe with recorders, whatever. So, and you have that in the back of the car. And let's say you're going to the horsey jumpy show, and you're setting up 15 cameras. Open the trunk of your car, put a generator there, bam, everything is pre-wired in the rack, and on the rack all you have is some SDI patch base, and your camera people are come running with cables plugging into the SDI patch base, and you're good to go. So if you have a full system pre-wired that has to be moved from A to B, it makes a lot more sense to have that in a rack versus in a panel in front of you that we always have to disconnect and connect again. So there are workflows where that makes sense. Now the ideal workflow for quick connection would be working with the Studio Camera Pro, which I've got 3 of, and working with the Studio Converter, because that means that those cameras actually are just connected with a single Ethernet cable, and everything else is in the rack. So that Studio Converter or Camera Converter sits in the rack with your Constellation. Everything is in the back connected. It's getting remote signal, it's getting program, blah, 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 and it's getting power. And those cameras are running on a single Ethernet cable. And they're getting remote, video out, and power. So on location, all you do is tripod, camera, Ethernet cable. Done. It's the fastest workflow possible. It's the cleanest workflow possible. That's what I've got set up here for 3 out of my now 4 cameras. Thank you, Sweetwater, for the 4th one. Now the advanced panels start at $3,000 for a 1ME 10 input one, and now they've got the most different one. 10 inputs right there on the panel, 20 inputs, 30 and 40, and then also several MEs. I never really understood why you would have to have different MEs. Mix effect. So pretty much what we're doing here, we're setting up something, we change different cameras, and you can actually do this on a second layer that you don't even see. Everything gets mixed together on a whole second layer, and I can access that second layer, let's say like one angle, like one camera, and then I switch to it, and then whatever was set up on that second layer now is visible. And that actually can be done on the 4MEs on 4 different layers. Maybe for 4 different locations. I'm a little bit confused because I'm not a TV person on how to use that, but there are different advanced panels up to $20,000 where you have more inputs and more MEs. Let's talk about the previous generation of switches. I think these are about 10 years old now. They're not black, they're silver. And there is the ATEM Production Studio 4K, 1855 or 1929 euro. Why am I talking about these? Well, because when you go to Sweetwater, they're still there. You can still find them online. So I said earlier, there's 21 different switches and you need to know which one is which. So the Production Studio has more HDMI inputs as well as SDI inputs. So it's kind of a combined thing. It doesn't have that many effects. But for 4K workflow rack mounted, it's good bang for the buck. 1855. Should you buy this? The next actual 4K workflow that's now available, other than this discontinued television studio, is $4,500. So if you want to get into a 4K workflow at less than half that with a production studio, you could have a 4K workflow. Yes, it is pretty antiquated technology in terms of the CPU. It doesn't have, they changed the effects, the transitions now can actually be softer instead of just really hard cuts. They improved things. However, it's a 4K workflow under 2K. It's 4K workflow under 2000. Also, very important to know, all the switches we're talking about now, the old ones, are ridiculously loud. Blackmagic Design was notorious for using very cheap fans. My old gear that I've got here, which is an old hyperdeck, and I have an older video hub, my brother modded with newer fans and holes in the chassis, and now they're much, much quieter. The older gear is so loud that you think a jet engine is taking off. I can hear that on the second floor and it's running on the first floor in the control room. It is very loud. You have to have a separate control room with a door that you can shut, separate from where you're recording your video. I didn't know that, and when I bought the 1ME, which is the next one we're talking about, I had to change my whole setup and actually have a secondary room where Leslie was working. So the ATEM 1ME Production Studio 4K, that's what it's called, it still clocks in at 2705, and it is actually the main engine in my Studio B. We are remote controlling that with a Stream Deck or with the Exonics. There's also, of course, a laptop in front of it for software control, and it is loud. But that was what started it all after I switched from the HD switcher, which I quickly sold again, to this. And I made so many videos with that thing. It's one rack unit. It has a single HDMI input on input number 1. Everything else is SDI, so you know you're gonna have to go to SDI recording. None of these old products, by the way, do live streaming or recording to hard drives. Just that's all new stuff. If you want to record, you need an outside separate recorder like a HyperDeck. It did do quite a bit of work for us. At 2700, buying something that's like 10 years old is really loud. I would recommend, I know it's a big step, but 2745, go for the brand new thing that also has a panel on this. It makes more sense. I did buy the 1ME and the panel, and then we're already at way more than what you would spend on the 4K8. So in terms of like real heart to heart, it's a great box, but it's seen its time, okay? And then they're still selling the one that we're using in my Studio A, which is a jet engine. 20 inputs, 20 outputs, all SDI. XLR input, which the new ones don't have because there isn't enough space. XLR out and in, actually. No digital inputs, no MADI. And that is clocking in still at $65.45. Now, that's a big 4ME 20 input switcher in 4K. What is the newest equivalent version? Oh, that would be the Constellation 4K with 40 inputs and 40 outputs, I think. 40 inputs and 20 outputs, I think. And that's the one I really want. But that's clocking in at 9,000. Or in Europe, 9,749. Ouch! So are you going to buy the one for 6,500? That's kind of outdated. Or 9.5, let's say roughly. That's brand new and has everything. I wouldn't buy the previous generation. The new generation does so much more when it comes to audio. So much more, and it is really worth investing. If you can find one like I did. On the used market, that is a different issue. So if you can find the previous generation used, maybe that's the way to go. Buying it new now, and I know stores are still offering these, selling them off, I don't know. It really depends on what you're looking for in your budget. And that was all 21 ATEM switchers and the pros and cons. Do you need HDMI? Do you need SDI? How many inputs do you need? What kind of outputs do you want? Where are you recording? On the switcher, internally, with the hard drive, on the computer. Are you doing live streaming? Yes or no? Maybe this confused you more than it helped, but I tried. So I'll put some links below that you please use. That really helps me. Thank you, Sweetwater, for commissioning this. You didn't know what you were getting into when you said, hey, Henning, make some videos about Blackmagic Design. And the next one will be this, but with cameras. Strap in, lads, it's gonna be a fun ride. And animals at the end.
In the day, there's an oddity in my way. I don't seem to care for what I did before. Playing tennis in a thunderstorm, sipping gin till the break of dawn, yeah.